Thank you all for joining this morning. We have Wednesdae Reim-Ifrach with us. Wednesdae is a trans non-binary art therapist, fat activist, and artist whose work focuses on body justice, intersectional social justice, eating disorder treatment, equity, access. They also co-own and operate Rainbow Recovery, where they support people through the gender affirmation process, complex trauma recovery, eating disorder recovery, body image issues using art, creative expression, traditional talk therapy. They also founded the country's first 2S LGBTQIA plus eating disorder program. Wednesdae melds the world of art therapy, social justice, trauma recovery, and eating disorder recovery into a unique opportunity for people to expand their understanding of the world. To that end, Wednesdae had the honor to participate in the Museum of Modern Art's Artful Practice for Well-Being and has had art displayed at the Baltimore Museum of Art as part of Art as Activism. They are presented at national and international conferences, are a former adjunct professor, and continues to guest lecture. They also serve on the board of Project HEAL, a nonprofit whose mission is to create treatment, equity, access in the eating disorder field. Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Connecticut Women's Consortium welcomes Wednesdae. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, Shelley. Every time someone reads a bio, I'm a little like, yeah, I just work for a living. It's fine. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. This is a labor of love that puts together everything that I do and I love to do, and I hope that you all get a lot out of it. So before I start, everyone will get a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm someone that if you have a question in the moment, you can put it in the chat, you can unmute yourself and ask. If you don't want other people to know you're asking a question, you can send it to me privately. This is for you all to learn, and I like to be in a collaborative environment, so don't hesitate. And there will be time for Q&A at the end for those that would rather wait. Then I'm going to go over specific terminology when we look at things through the anti-oppressive lens, what anti-oppressive trauma-informed care is, and then kind of learning what a sanctuary state is, because Connecticut is one of the few in the country that is, how that applies to gender-affirming care, and then we'll have some question time. Okay, implicit bias, my favorite. So according to the APA, right, implicit bias can also be known as implicit prejudice or implicit attitude. And it's basically a negative belief about any kind of specific social group, usually marginalized or oppressed, that someone's not consciously aware of, right? And so we kind of have to, in this training and in this lens I'm inviting you to join me in, is the idea that like we have these experiences, and based on those learned associations, we see particular qualities and social categories that we kind of create for people, including their race and gender. And what happens with implicit bias is it tells us when I see someone, this is a thing I'm supposed to think. And then you unconsciously act on it and unconsciously think about it. Implicit bias is an aspect of implicit social cognition. So it's the phenomenon that perceptions, attitudes, and stereotypes can operate before conscious intention or endorsement. This is important. I don't think any of us ever means to be any kind of ism or phobia towards any of our clients, and yet it happens, and it happens when we least expect it. So I just like a good infograph. Everyone likes a good image, right? So this is just the idea, right? You can see these cogs because it's your internal cognition, right? A little infograph for fun. And it's the idea that lots of things are seen in our implicit bias, right? Race, age, different stereotypes you've learned growing up, religion, and gender, which is our focus today. And as you're looking at this, if you're comfortable doing so, I would recommend writing down on a piece of paper, when you think of gender, like what are the things that come up for you? What words, what labels, and kind of hold on to those as we're moving through this and see what kind of comes up throughout the process. This is just another good one, right? To just explain your explicit bias is that you're aware and you're doing them on purpose, right? That's where people use hate speech, discrimination, prejudice, right? Remember, implicit bias is internal. And the reason why I hammer this home is that the average person, myself included, were raised to look at gender in a very specific way. And because of that very specific lens, we often end up harming each other as colleagues and harming our clients unintentionally. And so if we're looking at everything through an anti-oppressive lens, we have to unlearn the very stringent box that we've put gender in. So for some of this will be a review, and for some of you it won't, but the minority stress model is used to explain mental health disparities in sexual and gender minority groups. I always share with people, you can take sexuality and gender minority and put in any other oppressed group and it applies. But the model was specifically created to explain gender minority groups because of that current experience. And so what it suggests is that those of us that are from the queer community experience very specific kinds of stressors, right? That again, other marginalized groups do too, right? So social stigma, right? If you have any queer clients, maybe think for a second about the things that they've shared about their experiences in public, right? With the kind of average experience in a grocery store or walking down the street. There's also that expectation of rejection, and that includes the expectation that we will reject them. So that's why I bring that up, right? Are we going to lose family? Are we going to lose friends? Is our therapist going to understand us and affirm us, or are we going to lose our providers? Then, of course, family of origin rejection, and that happens on a spectrum based on the family unit's attitudes. Internalized homophobia and transphobia, that's the thing I actually work with the most through this lens, which is things about gender and sexuality have been so ingrained in us from such a young age that you can know what your identity is and be in that space and still unconsciously act in ways about yourself and people from the same social group without realizing that's what's happening. And then there's the concealment of sexual or gender identity, right? Not coming out, maybe it's not safe, maybe you don't feel worthy. Maybe you don't have people that you feel would support you, right? And then our socio-political efforts to exclude queer people from having equal rights. We know that we have, marriage equality. However, why we're talking about Connecticut as a sanctuary state is because, and you'll see a map in a little bit, a lot of states right now are banning gender affirming care. And so what that meant for me in doing this work and why this is important is I've actually had to give up licenses in other states because the work that I do is illegal there. And so I want you to think about that. We're in a state where you can treat queer and trans people and you don't have to worry about ethics, right? You don't have to worry about the ethics versus a licensure law versus a state law. And there are many states where our colleagues are going through that. So I like to give people, again, a good infograph. So you'll have these in your PowerPoint to explain things, but there's kind of two visuals, and you're going to see this one and the other one that kind of explain this process, right? So as you can see, if we're focusing specifically on gender, what people experience happens in stages, or it goes straight from point A to point B, depending upon the experience, right? So someone can experience gender discrimination, rejection, victimization, and non-affirmation. And it can go one of two ways, right? It can turn into that internalized transphobia, negative expectations, and concealment. Or I would argue, if we do really well, yes, it affects mental and physical health, but we interrupt the proximal stress factors and we kind of focus on those resilient factors forward. So my hope is at the end of the day, you can see the distal stress factors and go straight to resilience with good outcomes rather than watching a client go through the proximal stress, rebuilding up their resilience. And then we finally step in when harm has already been irreparably done by our culture, right? And then the other piece is that we move through all of those steps by creating community connectedness and helping our clients experience pride in who they are. We interrupt what happens from that resilience to trauma development. And so the reason why this is important, and I say to clinicians all the time, like put this up in your office when you're doing an intake or you're assessing a client, start assessing where are we in this stage and where can I interrupt this before it gets too far? Because that's kind of our work when we look at a lot of gender diverse people is trauma is inevitable. In fact, there's probably trauma long before you met them and worked with them. Even if someone's never had a lifetime of big and little T's, unfortunately, in our culture, just being a gender minority means trauma exists. So this model I like better. What I don't like is when Zoom puts a bar in the way. There we go. This one really better accurately explains what you can all do as people that work for kind of the state, right? Which is, again, like we're talking about stigma and discrimination against queer people, especially gender minorities. That leads to minority stress, like what we've been talking about, internal stigma, identity concealment. Disenfranchised grief is really big. I often encourage people when you use this model to ask clients if they're grieving any part of their life in that coming out process. And what's cool is this really directly shows you you've got two options depending upon when a client is in front of you, right? A client might come to you when they're already at the adverse health effects, right? Depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance use disorders. I don't know why it still lists cigarette smoking. That should be like vaping and or other things. Or we do a really good job because we get the client right after they've experienced minority stress and we interrupt the entire process and we interrupt the adverse health effects. So that's my hope for all of us is at the end of the day, everyone will know how to do that. And the way that we do that is through two sets of practices that align with anti-oppressive trauma-informed care. So the first is kind of what I think most of you do, right? Affirming clinical care, right? It's actually assessing for minority stress, going through all of this with a client, seeing where they are, asking them what their experiences are, validating their identity and their relationships based on that identity. I often say to people, like, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't understand what we haven't lived, but that doesn't mean we can't validate it. And then, right, the promotion of social and community connectedness, right? What resources do you know about in the area that you work in, especially for queer and trans people? If you don't know any, I got some for you. I'll always make sure people walk away with things like that. And then us doing our jobs, right? Integrating behavioral health care and providing referrals. And then the other side is the environment we work in. So I want you to see one is what we do, and the other is the environment we work in. And I often say to people, when you go back to your office or if you're in there today, have a look around, see what's happening, right? Training of all staff in queer care and queer inclusive policies. You're here, so good job. We got it. That's a check mark. Do you have representative images and public facing material? Do you have things like letting people know this is a decently safe space and that all people from all gender and sexuality backgrounds are welcome? And then this one, which I think can be hard based on grants and research, but is there data collection on sexual orientation and gender identity amongst your clients? Are clients coming out to you? Do you know how many exist? Do you know how well the treatment modalities that you're using are working? Right. And so we can take these two things, affirming clinical care and inclusive clinical environments, and we can disrupt this whole process before someone experiences trauma that's going to take a lifetime of healing when there's already trauma because we all have it. Okay. So I like to give people a history lesson. I think Rebecca and Shelley know this about me. I give this to you for many reasons. The biggest one is colleagues, clients, students I teach, almost everywhere I hear this is new. Being gender expansive is new. And I'm going to historically prove to you it's not new and that we've all been robbed as a result. So with gender labels, there's kind of two categories, which is ironic. There's binary gender. So that can be that you align with your sex assigned at birth, or you are transitioning from one binary identity to another. So male to female, female to male, right? And then non-binary is an entire umbrella of lots of labels that people think are new. So again, binary trans people, women or men, but some use different terms, right? We want to make sure that we are labeling people how they're asking us to. So like normal question you would ask in an intake, how do you want me to refer to you, right? I think you all do that. People, binary or not, use many different kinds of pronouns. They may use he, him, or she, her, right? Not all binary people use binary pronouns. They might use they, them, or neo pronouns. Pronouns don't always actually equate to someone's gender. And so that's something to think about is just because someone tells you a pronoun, we all are going to do that implicit bias. Oh, you said she, her. It must mean you're a woman, right? But that's not necessarily true. So that's the first thing I think we can all work on unlearning is, why do we think pronouns somehow equate gender? Right? I know. Now it's kind of like, that's odd. Why do we do that? Westernized culture, we're going to talk about that. Whereas non-binary is more of an umbrella term for different identities that are not strictly in the binary of men or women. And there are lots of different identities here: genderqueer, gender fluid, agender, two-spirit. Different cultures have so many labels that at this point there's like 60, 70, 80 that I know of. Like, we could have a whole slideshow about each label. We're not going to do that. And so again, like I'm saying, this isn't new. If you're really into history and you want to do a little research, different gender identities have been present in Greece, in Egypt, in indigenous cultures, in West African cultures, and even in the original colonies. It's just not talked about. But if you do research, you'll actually see that there's legal documents from the original colonies where judges would grant someone the right to, say, be a man, right? Because that's how they looked at it, right? So be assigned male at birth and wear clothes that one would consider traditionally feminine, and vice versa. So this has been happening for a really long time, even in cultures, when you think about the original colony is pretty repressed, right? So even in the most repressed cultures, this is happening. And there's a reason why we think it's new. We think it's new because white supremacy delivered through settler colonialism erased many of these identities. If you walk away with nothing else today, I hope you walk away knowing that you and I, regardless of our identities, have been deeply harmed by white supremacy on many levels. And in my opinion, one of them is the erasure of gender. So I bring this up because in World War II, Hitler had the Institute of Sexual Research in Berlin destroyed. This image is actually one of the few images that survived. And I'm sure if you look at them, you can't really tell what everyone's gender is. Your implicit bias will tell you that a facial feature looks like something, but you can't really tell. There were centuries of research that were at our fingertips, that's gone. And we could know so much more if it was here. And so that's the other thing to think about. We think it's new because someone wanted to erase every marginalized identity that they could. And they burnt down an entire research building that no longer exists, just so that we would all think someday that these identities were new. And it worked. And I want you all to sit with that. It worked. It worked on so many levels, right? But I'm not going to talk about the entirety of World War II. We're just talking about gender, and I want you to hear it worked. And I think that's what's really hard for a lot of us, is it worked so well we didn't know. Even I had to do a lot of research to find this out. This is not something that I just like came out and like knew. It's not like you come out and they plant all this weird knowledge in your head. You kind of have to do your own research. And to me, this was proof that a lot of our socio-political rhetoric is like factually incorrect, is how I look at it. Now, that's why we need to talk about anti-oppressive trauma-informed care, because we're now in the process, right? And I hope you all are in this moment of unlearning our implicit bias around gender and unlearning the lies that we've been told about the presence of gender diversity in our culture. So anti-oppressive practices, it's a big theory, right? It's pretty broad. So we're going to learn about it in the lens of what we can do for gender diversity. But you can find research where this applies to lots of other things. But it focuses on ending socioeconomic oppression and mitigating the effects of oppression. So we're not just trying to end our clients' experience of oppression when we're working with them in that trauma-informed manner. We're also trying to work through the effects of that, right? Depression, anxiety, PTSD, suicidality, substance use, eating disorder development. I can list all the things we all do, right? And so if we use this lens, we are going to learn how to help people heal and interrupt this process in a really direct way. What's nice is this is an interdisciplinary approach. So it's based in social work because it considers that macro system, right? And it's there to protect unearned privilege and power for some groups while creating in equitable conditions for others. Right. So it's using that macro lens of social work to basically break down where is power and privilege and how are we using it. The most common thing in social work is power over versus power with. And so this anti-oppressive lens asks us to no longer function from I'm the person in charge because I'm the provider. It makes the client the expert of their own experience. And this also focuses on understanding how systems of oppression, right, such as colonialism, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, we can keep going with the list, right, can result in individual discriminatory actions and inequities for marginalized groups. So what this lens also does, and when I learned it, I was really uncomfortable, which is like we get called out on our own behavior. We cannot provide trauma-informed care if we're not working through our own isms and phobias, because implicit bias sabotages us. And so this lens offers us the opportunity to actually heal ourselves in the process and almost have this beautiful parallel process with our clients of unlearning. So because this is a social work lens, you're going to hear me talk about social work. It applies to all mental health disciplines and those of you that are not in mental health but work in mental health. So this requires social workers to reflect on values, beliefs, and biases and actively work to eliminate oppressive systems and practices. So what this tells us is our job is actually not just with our clients, our job is with each other and outside in the world, because if you take this work seriously, it's going to change wherever you are. It's going to change when you are in a restaurant out with your friends and you hear someone make a transphobic joke. When you are out at a carnival and you hear someone say something racist about a stranger, right? You are going to become acutely aware of that and want to figure out how to fix it. Not that we can fix everything or other people other than ourselves and support our clients, but this challenges us to see the world for what it really is and in different ways. And it centers the experiences of equity deserving groups in order to build structure and systems that work for everyone. So this is the whole lived experience movement in mental health, right? Those of you that have lived experience, your clients that have lived experience, they're an equity deserving group that should get to be part of the building blocks of what we're doing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions before I go through the principles of anti-oppressive trauma-informed care? I don't see a chat, so I'm going to assume we're good and I'm going to keep going. You can just have me talk at you for a little bit. So the first part of anti-oppressive trauma-informed care is critical reflection on self and practice. So this is really important because, again, if we unlearn, we do a better job. And on that little piece of paper where I asked you to write down stuff about gender, I would also ask you to write down, if you could change one thing about your approach with marginalized or oppressed groups, what's the one thing you would want to change? I know that's really uncomfortable. That's why I'm not
That
writing.
they didn't have to be marginalized or oppressed.
Yeah, right? Wouldn't that be like the ultimate goal?
Right. I mean, if I had the power to change it, that's what I would change.
Agreed, right? So the hope is this model gives us the opportunity to work toward that in a way that I think often we're not empowered to do as providers. So I would argue not just social work, but any kind of therapist, counselor, any discipline is inherently a political role, which is really uncomfortable. Because politics makes people uncomfortable. And sometimes it means we have to separate our personal beliefs from the ethical values of what we're supposed to be doing. But this allows us to occupy a position of power and privilege, right, via the access to resources and hierarchical, structure of social service sectors. So this is where our power and privilege is our kind of our greatest gift, is the more you have, the more you can use it for good. So we can do power with our clients and share in that experience, and we can do power over with the system to force it to change. which means the higher up you are in a position of power, the more likelihood that you have to do that macro level work and really push for something that eliminates as much marginalization and oppression as possible, knowing that like all 38 of us can do that, but 38 people is still a really small group to do that work with. So it's also teaching our colleagues how to do this work. So it's crucial to be critically reflective to avoid recreating oppressive social relationships in practice. So that's why I'm asking everyone to kind of like reflect in this moment and write down what things come up for you with that. Because we have to criticize ourselves, and I think sometimes that's really difficult. That can feel shame-based. I've worked with a lot of people that have guilt about their privilege. I've had guilt about my privilege. And then we have to process, if I like reflect, what does guilt make me do? How does that change my actions? How do I become defensive? How do I say this is new? This is hard for me. Those are my favorite things when I do this work with gender. Actually, those are my favorite things when people that I work with and love say these things to me. This is new. I don't understand it. Those pronouns are really hard for me. I'm just going to keep getting it wrong and you're going to have to deal with, right? Those are the moments where we really need to be critically reflective and ask ourselves, do we understand that that's actually a form of transphobia? The same way you hopefully would never say to a client, like, you want your religion as part of your counseling. Well, I don't believe or understand your religion. I'm never going to. Right? That actually sounds wild that we would say that to a client. And so this is asking ourselves questions like, how does my social location create positions of privilege? Right? So I tell everyone all the time, I might have a gender and sexuality orientation that can be oppressed. I'm disabled, right? That might lead to oppression, but I'm white, so I have ultimate privilege in this culture. That's why it's an honor to do this work, because every time I do one of these trainings, I walk away going, oof, more things to unlearn, more things to be critically reflective of, more places to grow. So while this can seem scary, right, this lens can allow us to do a lot of amazing things for ourselves as well as our clients, because I really believe every therapist is a little bit of the Jungian wounded healer, right? We all come to this work for a reason. This also asks us how many social divisions impact my ability to best meet a client's service needs, right? So that's why you're here, because you're working for agencies that are trying to dismantle that through this work. And how do we create that foundation for reflection, and how our own biographies shape and create power differentials in our practice? So that's something else to reflect on, is how does your identities, whether it's your privilege or your marginalization, create power dynamics in your therapeutic relationships and in relationship with your colleagues? I'm just using you all and all of us as an example, but you can translate this to, of course, clients, because that's the whole point of this. The more we reflect, the better we are at our job working with gender minorities. So like I've been saying, right, when we're therapists, we already occupy that position of power. And so even our identity and social location can be, we're dynamic and heavily dependent on the context that we're in. So if I'm working with a gender minority who's not white, I have an extra position of power in that relationship that I have to reflect on. How am I using this in a therapeutic relationship that could be harmful? The same way if you're cisgender and you have someone who's trans or gender diverse in front of you, regardless of your other marginalized identities, you almost have to go, okay, I honor that I have these things and I have this extra privilege that this client doesn't. How do I want to see that show up in the room? So an example would be like a racialized female social worker working with a white male service user might navigate power differentials based on race and gender position that don't reflect normative service users' provider power imbalances, right? So it's also how much power and privilege does your client have in the world compared to you, and how are you going to bring that into the room? How are you going to honor your experience and their experience without both of you experiencing harm? Right. And so again, like part of this anti-oppressive lens is to first step into unlearning our own stuff before we step into the rest of this model. Okay, I know this is a lot. It gets fun really soon, I swear. Trying to be entertaining. So this is the critical assessment of service users' experiences of oppression. Honestly, if you work for DMIS, you probably do this really well because you mainly work with marginalized and oppressed people. But we're just talking about gender, so that's the examples that I'm going to keep using. So critical social workers and therapists strive to comprehensively understand the diversity and multiplicity of oppression in someone's life, right? So when your client's in front of you, this is where I love that minority stress model. See how we're going back to the beginning. When I do an intake with a client, I will often kind of make a note to myself of when we talked, these are kind of the lists of their powers and privileges, and these are the lists of their oppressions, and how do I see all of those intersecting with the reason why they're in front of me, right? So again, if we're looking at gender diversity, right, someone who's trans, who quote unquote passes, right, who looks like the gender they're not assigned at birth, while they are trans, there's a little extra privilege there compared to, say, myself, who most people call me a woman, lady, she, her, and that's not who I am, right? And so therein lies, in that therapeutic relationship where I'm with that client, a power differential, where I have to look at that privilege and go, all right, they have a privilege I don't. Where are there other levels of marginalization that I can support them in, while frankly getting supervision around the fact that like the gender difference can be difficult. So our personal, cultural, and structural processes each shape individuals' problems and access that they have to solutions. So, I mean, to me, that's the other thing, right? Lots of trans and gender diverse people come from homes and cultures where their identity is not welcome. And so that creates an internalized problem of self-worth. And so when they show up to us, part of our access to solutions could be connecting our clients to that community where they are with like-minded people, people with similar experiences, so that we can mitigate as much of that harm as possible. And then it's critically analyzing the intersections of oppression, right? And so this is where we move past just the gender and we go class, race, ethnicity, religion, ability status, right? How does this allow us to understand macro level policies and discourse and processes that impact our clients' lives? So I think this is the hardest part of that work. That we are lucky that we don't have to deal with in the same way. We still do. I will be the first to say that while Connecticut's like up there in sanctuary states, we still have a lot of work to do with this. And so it's when I look at the policies of where I work, or I look at the policies of the state I'm working in while I'm working with gender diverse people, where are those policies really enforcing that oppression? Right? Where are the educational policies if you're working with kids in school? Where are the policies for access to care, for access to things like, prenatal support if someone is trans and able to give birth, right? There's a whole spectrum of things that even in a sanctuary state we don't have. And so similarly, this critical analysis also needs to be turned inward. So that's the hardest part about using an anti-oppressive trauma-informed lens, is you're constantly in that self-reflection stage the entire time, right? To understand how social work and counseling discourse and language use, right, in framing of problems that can attribute to sustained oppressive power structures. So when we do not practice reflection, we sustain the oppressive power structures at play. Right. And my favorite is language. So the phrase that we all probably say the most that I hate that gets said about trans people specifically is maladaptive and non-compliant. Now, we're clinicians. We're going to use those words. That's part of our work. However, if I hear one more therapist say a trans person is non-compliant because they didn't follow through with a referral because the referral didn't feel safe, I'm going to break this computer. And so that's something we have to think about. Are we giving resources to clients that are scary for them because they don't know when it comes to their race or sexuality, or their gender or sexuality? Yes. race and all those other marginalized identities that they would be afraid to follow through with because we have not addressed whether or not this referral is safe. And then they don't do it. And then we mark down things like they're being non-compliant. Non-compliance is not, this doesn't feel safe, I'm not doing it. And so when we are doing trauma-informed care and we're using an anti-oppressive lens, we're actually discussing the referrals beforehand. So before we get to the non-compliant stage, before we get to that oppressive language, we're asking ourselves, how did we contribute to that? And, you know, we're going to have clients that, for example, use substances and they are going to be non-compliant because they're using substances, for example. But when we're looking at things like gender minorities, are what we're offering our clients actually trauma-informed and safe for them? So the next stage, right, is empowering the service user. So we're empowering our clients, right? Again, this framework uses neutral language. So service users is one of the central tenets of anti-oppressive trauma-informed care because it strives to create the empowerment process, both at the interpersonal and institutional level. This is my favorite. I love encouraging a client to reach out to their state senator, their town representative. I actually was doing this with a client last night, so I will share this with you all. I have a client, she is queer and so is her future wife, and they went to get a marriage license, and the town that they were in, all the documents say bride and groom, and there's no place to change that groom to bride or to partner or to another term that actually accurately reflects who she is. So last night we worked on writing a letter to their mayor and to the governor and to the state representatives with copies of everything and asking them to make sure that every town has their documentation amended so that people can use the gender terms that work for them in their relationship, right? So by empowering them at that interpersonal level between us, they were able to advocate for themselves at that institutional and statewide level, right? So that's amazing. I mean, imagine if you have a trans person walk in with a problem and they walk out with you empowering them to take control of the situation, and we're able to guide them in ways to do that self-advocacy. So at the interpersonal level, right, the process of externalizing structural oppression is key to being able to deconstruct experiences and recognize how social forces impact service users' lives, right? So I'm an art therapist, so I do a lot of externalizing with clients through art. You can do it any way you want to, but the idea is that rather than letting that trauma of, for example, right, the experience that my client had with her marriage license, we externalized it through the letters that she wrote. We challenged that structural oppression through that process. And so even if she never gets a response, which I really hope is not the case, at the end of the day, she was able to use that empowerment to externalize that structural oppression so that she wasn't internalizing it as something wrong with her or her partner. And so this process allows people to see the true nature of their circumstances by analyzing the structures and institutions that impact and influence their ability for social mobility, economic prosperity, and educational attainment, right? So I empower the client to write the letter. They write the letter, so we've not internalized this. And now in therapy, we're able to talk about the actual nature of the system as a whole and to start unlearning those internalized views of one's self-worth related to their gender because we've been able to do that process. And what's amazing is you start connecting that one experience to lots of other experiences that that client has had until they're really doing that deep unlearning work because we've been able to challenge the system together. So at the institutional level of this, right, anti-oppressive social work and counseling promotes changes to organizations and the delivery of services in ways that enhances anti-oppressive practices and service user control. So this is where I'd ask you on that piece of paper, where I asked you to keep jotting stuff down, right? If you use this model with a client and you wanted to change something in the organization you work for, or change the way a service was delivered, just what would that change be? And hold on to that. But I think it's important, right? We can all love our jobs and love what we're doing, but nothing's perfect. So how do we change the system? Right? You're here, so you're actively changing, like 39 of us are actively changing the system right now as we speak. Right? So how can we do more? So practical ways to promote empowerment include ensuring that our clients' views and stated needs are incorporated into assessments and solution options. This is really important when we talk about gender affirming care because more often than not, therapists will go, well, I'm not a medical provider, so as long as I validate my client and I use the right pronouns, we're good, right? That's like being a decent human being, using someone's correct name and pronouns, validating their identity. That's just like being a basic good human. So this is really about when a client comes to me and they say they want access to hormones, but the wait list at where they want to go is really long. Can I do research to find out where else they can go? Or, you know, the industry standard is they want to have top surgery and they need multiple letters. And at one point in time, Husky kind of switched the script on us and decided you needed someone with a PhD on top of your 2 letters from a therapist to access that surgery. Do you know how many PhDs are in the state that do gender affirming care? 5. 5 that openly advertise this is what they do. So I want you to think of how many people are in Connecticut and how many clients you have just individually. So those 5 people can all not just write letters all day, every day for free. And yet we all write letters all day, every day for free. And so that could be us advocating against Husky, which a group of us did, and we won. Yay, there's one for the team, right? But they come to you and do you have a supervisor that can help you sign a letter? How do we help our clients get access to things so that those needs are being met without having to take risks? This is my favorite because this is what I strive to do, which is working in partnership with our clients and our colleagues. So again, this anti-oppressive lens prioritizes working in partnership with our clients through collaborative efforts that position the client as the expert in their own life. This is really important. This is important for lots of reasons that I'm sure most of you know. But the biggest one when it comes to gender identity is in our current culture, especially with an election coming up in November, a lot of us have never felt more powerless, more not in control, more scared than I think a lot of us have ever felt. You know, I see multiple students and clients a week with similar identities, and this has just been, what's today, Thursday? So I think I've spent at least 20 hours between Sunday and today kind of having the same talk over and over. And so when we partner with our clients, right, we show them that, yeah, there's fear in the world. And I don't blame you or really any of us for being scared for November by any means. But what we're doing is we're asking them to be the experts of their own lives and allow us to join them on that journey so they're not alone in that fear. And then consequently, right, our clients need to be included as much as possible in decision-making processes that impact their life. So, I mean, that's the other thing is like, a big thing in gender affirming care is for therapists to often try to choose what a client is or isn't ready for. Again, like gender affirming surgeries and hormones tend to be the things that therapists make their own opinions on the most. And while I think it's important for us to talk to our clients and make sure that they understand what they're doing, risks of complications, things of that nature, many therapists make decisions for their clients by refusing to write a letter or refusing to document something or not giving a referral because they don't think their client is ready. And so when we don't work in partnership, we're continuing to traumatize our clients rather than using that trauma-informed care that we all say that we do, but like we can say we do lots of things. It's the action and the follow-up that actually builds that better rapport with our trans clients. So, as we've been saying, right, this is achieved through a deliberate sharing of power and commitment to transparency. And this is where service users have the full information and awareness of the circumstances to make the best decision that's in their best interests. So this is where we talk with clients about if this is what you want, I want you to talk to your doctor and I want you to come back to me and I would love for you to share kind of what do you understand about what you want to do, the timeline, the costs, the risks, the benefits, and then let's figure out how to make it happen. But I want to make sure you're doing this with all the knowledge you can. And I tell everybody, I can sit here and I can give any of you information on all the procedures and all the things. I just didn't think it was appropriate for us to go through that entire list today. But people need to be educated on what they're asking for. And we can empower our clients to do that so that we're breaking down as many gatekeeping barriers as possible to people's care. So working in partnership attempts to balance that unequal power dynamic by working against the hierarchical structures together, like us and our clients. And that creates that supportive environment where our clients are able to access necessary resources and information that helps them work collaboratively with us. And that's what it comes down to, right? If we take that barrier between our clients and us, we can create a space in which our trans and gender diverse clients get the majority of their needs met in a safe way. And the reason why I'm going to keep saying a safe way is I've worked with clients that have like ordered their hormones from Thailand. I've worked with clients that have done procedures with people that probably shouldn't have done them. I worked with clients that have ordered their own Botox and injectables online and done that to themselves and caused irreparable damage. And it was because they were working with providers that weren't trained, that didn't give them access to resources or referrals or encourage education. And obviously, clients are making poor choices, so it's not all on the therapist. But we have ways to prevent like serious harm from happening. This is an interesting one. So minimal intervention. So a really big key to anti-oppressive trauma-informed care is reducing oppressive and disempowering situations within the therapeutic relationship. And so when we use this lens, we minimize the opportunity of social control by strategically intervening in the least intrusive way possible in our client's life. So this is about us giving our clients that access and education that doesn't fully disrupt their living experience while meeting someone's needs, right? And so what that also means is that early intervention. So before we are making bad choices, right, about ways to access gender affirming care, we can emphasize preventative services, which contribute to minimal intervention and less disruption, right? And preventative services are often, right? A trans person comes to you, you first have to assume oppression and trauma. What are ways we can disrupt that? What are ways that we can connect people? What are ways on day one that we're showing that validation, affirmation, and access to community so that we're interrupting the likelihood of their mental health further deteriorating? And I think it's somewhere else in the slideshow, but trans and gender diverse people are 50% more likely to die by suicide, overdose, develop an eating disorder. So when we're doing this early intervention, when we first meet clients, we really are providing life-saving care in ways that people don't often understand. Okay, so this is the final part of kind of the anti-oppressive lens. So if we're willing to use anti-oppressive lenses of trauma, then we're willing to create a trauma-informed, brave space for our clients. And this allows gender minorities an affirming environment for exploration. I like this chart because it kind of challenges the idea of safe space versus brave space. I often say to people when we're working with any marginalized group, right? Safe is great, but we can't change the world outside of our office. So we have to help our clients learn how to be in the brave space reframe. So that's when we elevate our basic trauma-informed care to this anti-oppressive lens, because we're teaching our clients ways in which to communicate and be in the world while honoring having knowledge that like the world is not a safe place for a lot of us for a lot of reasons. And so part of that is moving past things like agree to disagree to learning how to have controversy with civility, right? So instead of having our clients kind of do the fawn and freeze of being in a situation, we can empower our clients to figure out when is a good time to speak up and how do we want to do so. how do we separate the difference of an idea and a person, right? So in a safe space, we would just say don't attack people. And that's great, but I don't see the rest of Connecticut doing that. So we help our clients understand the difference between people's ideas and who they are as people, and how do we learn how to see that? Right. Again, a lot of safe space will ask us to not take things personally, but instead we remind our clients to take care of themselves, even if that means leaving a situation they want to be in. Or, safe space and assume positive intent. That's great in theory. However, right, this is about teaching our clients how to own intention and how to understand people must own their intention and the impact it has. Right. So my biggest and easiest example is that you meet a client who's gender diverse, they're using a neo-pronoun, so not he, him, she, her, they, them. You use the wrong pronoun and your response is like, but I didn't mean it. I know you didn't mean it. I know that. Your client might know that, right? But you can say you had positive intent and you understand what you just did was a phobic behavior. And then safe space asks us to respect others, right? Whereas brave space brings us back to that controversy with civility. So we can respect each other and other people and still be able to have a disagreement. It's just how we have a disagreement. And this is where I remind clients that this is that conversation space where the minute someone starts to do things that are oppressive, we go back to take care of yourself. And so if we're using anti-oppressive trauma-informed care, we are relating to each other as colleagues and with our clients through a brave space reframe, because we cannot promise safety. If you can, please tell me, I'd like to know how. I mean that not sarcastically, like truly, if someone's figured that out, that would be beautiful. And if the world is not safe for us as providers, how is it safe for our clients?
Wednesday, I just wanted to
Yeah.
comment that, when we, as you know, I chair the LGBT collaborative, and we have a group of folks that, and we're always trying to kind of work on how to create more inclusive spaces and affirming spaces. And I think to your point, one of the things that came up, because there's safe zone, quote, safe zone trainings and safe space stickers, and, some of the folks, which was just so helpful, shared that like, it was kind of like, don't tell me what's safe. How do you get to tell me what's safe, And so we've kind of pivoted in that. And I think it's always something we're looking to kind of think about is how can we create these spaces that feel more affirming, but making sure that the people who are actually providing the service are actually following through with the practices.
Yep.
Because you can have the sticker.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also just really appreciated that concept. I love the brave space reframe. And I appreciated that kind of reframe on the safe space. Like, don't tell me what's safe. Like, I'll determine for myself what is safe. So just wanted to add that.
No, I love that. And I appreciate that. And I think that's true for all of us, right? I'm sure that's true for you too, Rebecca, that like
Yeah.
each of us feel safe in a different way, depending upon who's in the space, what our experiences are, what our triggers are. And, I'm the first person to say, like, do I love a good safe space sticker? Of course I do. Like, I think that's a great idea. And like in my most ideal clinical world, we would have some kind of brave space stickers with a chart like this out for clients to see and understand that we can't promise safety because I don't know what's safe for each person, but I can promise to offer a brave space where I'm willing to be authentic and vulnerable and make mistakes and work through rupture and repair, which I think is something that a lot of us fear, right? Especially with trans and gender diverse people, is like we don't want to do harm. And at the same time, like we're inevitably going to. And I say like to people all the time, I make mistakes with my trans clients all the time, and we're from the same community. So of course we're all going to make mistakes. But if I own that and I honor that impact and I work through it, we've created that bravery together, which is really, really special in my opinion, because it empowers our clients to go out in the world and demand that from everyone around them, or to not be around those people anymore. Okay, so we're going to talk about being in a sanctuary state very specifically, because that's where we all work and that's what we're in. So it's funny, I've been doing a bunch of research to be like, there's got to be a law or something on this. There's not. It's really interesting. So there's no legal definition for what a sanctuary policy is, but the term is applied to jurisdictions that limit cooperation with federal authorities, such as failing to provide information about gender minority status. So this is big, right? By being in a sanctuary state, Connecticut is basically saying they will not cooperate with federal authorities should a law be put into place federally that would block gender minorities from receiving care, from changing their documents, or in worst case scenario, we've seen in some spaces outlawing an identity to the point where it's dangerous for the person to exist. And so this is where I'm always like, Connecticut's not perfect, but kudos for this one, because that's a really big, bold statement in America as a state to say, I'm actually not going to cooperate when these things happen. And so some states and local governments will have policies that limit cooperation in civil investigations to support public safety and community policing goals, such as encouraging witnesses and victims of crimes to come forward, right? So there's other parts of sanctuary states that do lots of other things, right? So it could be that the state supports someone in public safety. So in general, under federal and Connecticut state law, nearly all health plans cannot discriminate based on sex. And because of the Supreme Court ruling in Bostock versus Clayton, they concluded that all gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination is a form of sex discrimination, and therefore nearly all health plans cannot discriminate against queer people. So this is really, really big. So this means that regardless of what a policy says on a state and technically federal level, gender minorities fall under sexual discrimination. So the same laws that protect cis women are the same laws that protect all gender minorities. It's important that we know that because the average person doesn't know that. It's a really good thing to know when we're working with a client that's experiencing that needs us to kind of step up and step into a situation with them. So for transgender people's access to best practice healthcare, right, sometimes also called gender-affirming care, right, it's increasingly under attack. And we're going to look at a map, but there are so many states right now where people can't access gender-affirming care that's actually affecting cis children, because when we outlaw hormone replacement therapy, we don't outlaw it just for those that have gender-affirming care. We outlaw it for men and women who have low estrogen or testosterone and need hormone injections to live comfortably, for children that are having growth issues and need growth hormones. We are now blocking care for everyone. And so that's what I always say to people is if you block care for one group of people, you block care for everybody. Whether the people writing these bills realize it or not, which I would argue they don't care to realize it or not. So that's something to think about, is that when best practice healthcare, right, of any kind, but especially gender affirming care is under attack through a law, it's attacking your rights too. It just takes a little more thinking to move under and think about what that means. So in response, a growing numbers of states are taking action to protect access to medically necessary healthcare. So some places call it sanctuary state. In legal terms, they call it a shield or a refuge law, and they vary from one state to the next. But the primary goal is to protect trans and gender diverse people, their families, and medical providers, including all of us, against ongoing attacks and to protect access to transgender related healthcare. So what that means is that legally, when you practice in the state of Connecticut as a therapist or as a doctor or as just a human being in the world, your healthcare is protected through a shield law as part of being in a sanctuary state. But that also means that if you don't provide gender competent care and you focus, whether intentionally or not, from a transphobic place, you are actually breaking laws as a therapist, along with ethical codes. And there's a lot there with this. So the best example is a person travels from a state where transgender healthcare is banned and receives the care in another state. A shield law also protects the recipient and the provider of the healthcare against civil or criminal charges from the state where healthcare is banned. And so that's why Connecticut is one of the biggest sanctuary states, is because people come here, whether it's short term or they move, to seek care they can't get other places, and they're legally protected. I've worked with families that will fly from Florida to Connecticut because they cannot afford to uproot their lives and all of their children's lives, but they want their child to get care. And so once a month, they come to Connecticut to get their child's care needs met, which, when you think about that, is wild that someone would have to go that far in order to get the help that they needed. So this is the map we've been talking about this whole time. So this map shows states with policies defending gender affirming care. So all the gray blocks you see that there are no laws or policies protecting access. That's the big thing. It's protecting access. So as you can see, more than half the country has no desire to protect access to gender affirming care, which, just so that I've said it here, for those of us that are trans and gender diverse, in my opinion, these are states I can never go to. Because if you don't want to protect me, then you must want to hurt me. Whereas these light blue squares, Arizona, Maryland, and New Jersey are the only ones on here. There are executive orders that protect gender affirming care, but laws have not fully gone into place because bills take a long time to pass. And then these bright blue ones, they make me the happiest, have laws that protect gender affirming care. And so when these bright blue states had those laws, they all committed to becoming sanctuary states, which means anyone in any of these gray states can come to any state in the bright blue and get care with under a sanctuary state with a shield law in place so that care can be provided. And if you look at this, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? Oh yeah, that little thing is New York. So there's 11 states that people can go to if they're trans right now, where they don't have to completely be in fear. 14 if we count those light blue squares. So, I mean, that's a lot to take in, and that makes our jobs hard because we're getting a lot of clients from out of the state. We're getting families moving to Connecticut all of the time. The same way we're seeing a lot of people move, specifically Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts are kind of the biggest ones on the East Coast and the West Coast. The biggest ones are California, Oregon, and Washington. And that is just where people choose to move in order to access care and feel safe. So to keep going, to understand what's happening, so this process started in Connecticut in 2011. You can look this act up. It's Connecticut General Assembly's Public Act 1155. So it amended multiple statutes to specifically prohibit discrimination based on gender identity and expression in employment, public accommodations, housing, and extending credit and the ability to access credit. Part of this was to codify the protection of gender diverse individuals that the state of Connecticut Commissions on Human Rights and Opportunities recognized and declared a ruling earlier in 2000. So over 11 years, this law has been expanded to really protect gender diverse people from discrimination as much as possible. As I'm sure any of you that are marginalized have experienced, laws does not always mean people follow them or behave in ways that are appropriate, but they are there for our client safety and the safety of people that are coming from these states to us. So it also amended section 1015CA of the general statute, which provides all students with equal access to education, programming, and activities, regardless of gender identity or expression. So thus, Connecticut reiterates its strong commitment to ensuring that all students feel valued, visible, protected, and empowered to pursue education in a safe and inclusive learning environment. And so between Public Act 1155 and Section 1015, people are coming to us because their gender affirming rights are covered, and if they're moving here because they have trans children, their children should get access to education that also affirms them. I'm always going to say should, because just because these exist doesn't mean every town, every school district, every therapy office is following it, but we need to know that we work in a sanctuary state where these things exist, and they exist to protect people, not just in Connecticut, but all of the people out of Connecticut that need to come to a safe place for the sake of their children or themselves. So again, big summary of that. In Connecticut, it's illegal for medical and mental health providers to discriminate against trans and gender diverse people. That includes microaggressions and harm caused by that implicit bias or outright discrimination of any kind. And that's important for us to know, because when we make mistakes, if we make them enough, a client does have a legal right for protection, and for action. And these laws that Connecticut have put in place are in line by all of the principles set forth by every licensure board group that there is. DPH, APA, all of NASW, all of them have some released statement regarding this. And so Connecticut, again, and these sanctuary states are the ones that are also in line with our ethical practice and guidelines. So again, like we've been talking about, right, this intersects with gender affirming care because it's illegal to discriminate against someone based on their gender. And it is illegal to prohibit them from getting gender affirming care. But there's a lot more that we need to do if we're going to be providing anti-oppressive trauma informed care and be those providers. We need to move past being not discriminatory and move into being wholly affirming, empathetic, and as safe as possible in a world where it's dangerous for transgender and gender diverse people to exist. So it's not enough to unlearn implicit bias and behave socially appropriately with our clients. It's to learn how to develop compassion and empathy and truly understand why we need to provide environments for our gender diverse clients that are affirming and allow access. So the best way to understand why this is important for us is to humanize what we've discussed so far. So like I said earlier, research has shown, right, and you can find this through the Trevor Project. I think their last survey, 2020 or 2022, have these statistics that said that trans and gender diverse people, again, 50% more likely to die by suicide, develop a substance use issue, develop an eating disorder, be bullied and harassed, or be murdered in a hate crime. And so research also shows that all someone needs is one affirming person to reduce the risk. So by affirming, you are giving a human being a fighting chance to live. And so part of being in a sanctuary state is that, you know, when these laws happen, they happen because this information is put in front of a committee of people that have decided that we are going to protect people from this. We've gone over anti-oppressive trauma-informed care. I know you all know what trauma-informed care is, right? So it asks us to safety. We're going to switch that to bravery. And that is about, what is the environment like when someone walks in your office? And again, I want you to just look around the room you're in. If you're in your office, like, what does your office look like? Would clients see something that let them think that maybe you are that safe, brave person that can be validating and affirming? Again, a sanctuary state doesn't require you to do that within your office, but I would suggest it, right? It's also providing choice. And I think choice can be the hardest for us when it comes to gender affirming care, because it is such, you know, these are medical procedures and we are asked to write letters and we are asked to say that we feel our clients are ready for these things. And it puts us in this precarious position where we are being asked to give or take away choice based on our clinical opinion. And you have to work through what is most comfortable for you without being a barrier to someone's care. I would say this is most important as a sanctuary state when we have especially children that are moving with their families from an unsafe state, where now a family has no job and no house and probably no money, because moving, say, from, you know, the south of the Midwest to Connecticut's really expensive to live in. I'm sure you all know that yourselves, right? That's a really big financial risk and change for a family. So to then come to us thinking that this is a safe space and taking away that choice is so much more damaging than we can realize, because someone's already given up everything to give their kid a fighting chance, and now we're taking away that fighting chance. And then trustworthiness and transparency, right? How do we build that trust and that rapport with our clients, right? Are we able to not just validate the trans or gender diverse experience? Are we able to kind of label what they've experienced as they're coming into Connecticut? Are we able to honor that they're coming from a state where, you know, Florida is always my favorite example because their laws are bonkers, right? when you're coming from a state where you're not allowed to talk about any kind of gender or sexuality in school, when you're not allowed any of your medical treatments, where children are being taken off of their hormones and being forced to go through puberties that those hormones were helping them avoid, how can we be the trustworthy people that we're not perpetuate that harm? And that is by being transparent and labeling what our understanding of that circumstance is and asking them what that was like for them, knowing that these laws were in place and that was a reason for them to uproot their lives. Right. And that is why, again, right, we work in collaboration with our clients because we want to figure out the trauma that's been done in that moving process and what that means. And when we're being trustworthy and transparent, right, and we're being collaborative, that's where the empowerment comes in, where our clients get to be the experts of their own experience and where we really get to empower them to figure out, now that we're in this new life, in this new place, and we're starting over again, what do you want for yourself? What is it like to finally be in a space where you can go to the doctor and get your needs met, where you are not totally worried about your child being at school all day, every day? Again, each school district is different, but that's the general idea. And then, humility and responsiveness, that brings us back to intention versus impact, right? When I make a mistake, can I own my mistake? Can I honor the impact that it's had? Can I discuss about things like the power relationship in a therapeutic relationship where I am the barrier to an access for care? And how am I going to be able to verbalize that I will no longer be that barrier? And some of the barrier of access to care is, again, like we'd been talking about, the refusal to use pronouns, the refusal to use a chosen name, the rhetoric around this is new and I don't understand, right? These are things that a lot of our clients hear all day, everywhere. And when we're living in a sanctuary state, we have an ethical and legal responsibility to kind of cut that behavior out. Okay. So when we, again, look at sanctuary states through gender affirming care, I really want people to think about these questions. I'm not going to ask people to just kind of answer them right now. We're going to have time in about 10 minutes for questions and answers anyway. But I want you to think for a minute, maybe jot something down. How can you be anti-oppressive trauma informed if you don't provide gender affirming care? How can you just be trauma informed if you don't provide gender affirming care? How are you safe or brave if you misgender or dead name a client? I'm not saying you're not going to make a mistake. I'm always remind people mistakes are normal, but how can you ensure that you are a safe and brave person for them? How are you supporting choice if you don't take an anti-oppressive affirming lens? Because at the end of the day, gender affirmation is a choice. Everyone chooses to do that in a different way based on who they are. It's not always surgery and hormones. It could be the way someone cuts their hair, the way they change the way they dress, their name. But how are you supporting that? If you're not using a specific lens in which provides us the ability to do that? How can you be trustworthy if you're unwilling to accept clients for who they are? What are we supposed to do, right? Or are clients supposed to do when they're trans and they don't feel accepted by you and your environment that you've created, where the mistakes and the lack of choice and the lack of safety kind of build up over time? And how can you collaborate with gender affirming care providers? How are you doing that now? How do you want to do that in the future? Can you think about ways that you want that to change in your work? And how are you embodying, how are you empowering clients to step into their authentic selves? I think this is the biggest one if we're talking about an anti-oppressive lens in a sanctuary state when we're working with trans and gender diverse people, is, do you know how to empower a client to step into their authentic self? Do you know how to help a client work through this process? Some people have a really easy time with their gender identity and they just want their therapist to validate them and make sure letters are written and it's not a big part of who they are. That is not true for the average client that I've worked with, which is this is such a painstaking process because there is so much fear. And there's so much social stigma. And if you have not given a client an inclination that you're accepting, it's really hard for a client to kind of come to you with this so that you can empower them. And then how are you embodying humility and cultural responsiveness if you don't know how to talk to people of all genders and gender expressions? And I think that's really important. If you don't know how to use language to address this, how are you embodying your cultural humility and cultural responsiveness? And it's okay to not know, you can learn, right? Not everyone's going to do this work, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to learn how to talk to people in the way that they deserve to be treated. Oh my gosh, computer. There we go. So I want to kind of leave us with this before we all have a discussion and questions, which is, an alarming truth. So 320 transgender people were murdered in 2023. So that's almost a murder a day for the entire year. The average age of the person that was murdered was between 19 and 25, but the youngest was 10. This doesn't include death by suicide or death by overdose, death due to eating disorder complications, death due to homelessness or other medical or mental health complications created by a lack of affirmation, right? So the statistics are basically hate crimes, not all of the other complications. And so this is where I ask all of you and myself and every provider out there, how can you be a part of saving a life? How can you be a part of the solution so that all the other ways that someone can go, right? We can't control murder, but we can, to a certain extent, be affirming enough that as an affirming person, our client's mental health doesn't take the massive hits that turn into the other forms of death. And that's scary and that's sad. And I hate ending things that way, but it's the reality of why Connecticut is doing what it's doing. And it's the reality of why that oppressive lens needs to exist to do this work. Because we live in a state where we are promising our clients, whether it's Connecticut promised it for us or not, that we are going to be that sanctuary for this experience and that we are going to be part of the solution and part of the reasons why someone is affirmed and welcome in the world.